In JavaScript, there are three different ways to declare a variable, and you can use either var, or let, or const for this. Var was used in JavaScript from the very beginning, and it was a single way to declare a variable. Let and const were introduced in ECMAScript 6. Before talking about them, let's talk about var. And let's talk about following topics. Let's discuss first variable scope. Then we will discuss variable reassignment. After that, we will talk about variable redeclaration. And finally, we will talk about hoisting. Okay, let's start with variable scope. Let's declare first variable, and it will be variable a, so var a, and it will have value 10. And let's console log this variable, like this. Let's save the file, and here in the browser's console we will get 10. If I'll try to access a directly in the browser's console, I'll also get 10. It means that a is global scoped variable, and it can be accessed anywhere in your code. If I'll try to access window.a, I also get 10. Why? Because window is a global object in the browser, and a, that is a global scoped variable, is one of its properties. If I'll simply access window, I'll get window object. If I expand it, I'll get a here on the list. So a is variable name and 10 is its value. So again, a is global scoped variable in this case. If I create function fn without any parameters, and here in the body of the function I will declare variable b, var b, and assign value to it true, and now console log b, and call function here. Save the file, and now I get 10 and true, so true is result of this statement. But if I will try to access b outside of the function, like this, console log b, and save the file, I'll get reference error, b is not defined. That's because b is limited to the scope of this function, and it's not possible to access variables that were declared inside of the function, outside of it. Okay, if I will look at a window object again, I'll see that a is on the list, but b is absent, because scope of the variable b is just this function. Summary is following. If you use var to declare a variable will be created either in global scope, like variable a, or in a function scope, like variable b. Okay, let's comment this part out, and let's move on to variable reassignment. So, what is reassignment? If you create variable var c equal to 1, and then reassign value of this variable, so c equal to 2, let's save the file and now access c, you'll get 2. It means that on this line we have declared variable and assigned value to it, and on second line we have reassigned value to this variable. If variable was created in the global scope, I can reassign its value, for example, in the function fn2 without any parameters, and here I can simply reassign value of the variable c. Let's call this function fn2. Let's save the file, and now if I'll get c, I'll get 3. Because here I have changed value of the global scoped variable. So that is called variable reassignment. Okay, let's move on to next part and talk about redeclaration. So let's declare one more variable, var d, equal to false. And then perform same task, var d equal to true. Save the file, and now if I'll access d, I get true. What happened here? I have declared variable on this line, and then I have redeclared it here. And with var it is possible, so no error is thrown here. You can even redeclare same variable inside of the function. Let's create function fn3 without any parameters again, and here you can redeclare variable d, var d, and value will be 5. Let's call this function fn3 here, and let's save the file. But before saving, question to you. What I will get here in the console if I will try to access d? Let's save and access d. I'll get true. What happened here? I have declared variable on this line, and this variable was created in the global scope. Then I have redeclared this variable and assigned another value to it. And then, inside of the function, I have declared variable d again. But in this case, this variable was declared inside of this function, so it is limited to the scope of this function. So this assignment will not change value of the d in the global scope. So in this case, I have two different variables. One variable d in global scope and second variable d in function scope. Okay, let's move on and let's talk about hoisting. I'll comment this out, and here I'll do following. I'll use variable e without declaration and assign value to it, for example 5. And only after that I'll define this variable, so var e. Let's save this, and here in the browser's console I'll access e, and I'll get 5. No error is thrown. What does it mean? It means that I have used variable before its declaration, and JavaScript in this case, before code execution, has found all variable declarations and put them at the beginning of the code. It means that JavaScript engine performed following. It has taken this declaration and inserted here. That is called hoisting. Okay, let's move on, and next let's talk about let. And we will cover same topics, so scope, reassignment, redeclaration, and hoisting. Let's comment it out, save, and see you in the next lecture. Bye! Before moving on with let, let's first talk about different scopes. We have just discussed what is a global scope and what is a function scope. So, let's recap. Global scope. Any variable that is created, let's say, in the root of your JavaScript file is created in the global scope. So A is a global scoped variable. Then comes function scope. If you create a function fn, and create variable inside of this function, var b, then this variable is created in the scope of this function. And of course, you are not able to access this variable outside of this function, and we have tried it in the previous lecture. And finally comes block scope. Block is simply set of statements between curly braces. So that is a block of statements. And if you declare variable here, var c, it is declared inside of the block. But with var, this variable that is created inside of the block will be created in the global scope. It means it will be available everywhere. Let's prove this. Let's assign value to it, 10, save the file, and here I'll access c, and here I'll get 10. Okay, let's delete this assignment, save the file, and now I'll show you another example of the block scope. So if you create if-else statement, if just true, and here comes also block of statements, else another block of statements. If you use, for example, for loop, var I equal 0, I less than 5, I++, And then comes also block of statements. So here is example of the block of statements, here is example of the block, and here is example of the block. Okay, let's move on, and next let's talk about let. See you in the next lecture. Okay, we have discussed how var behaves, and we have discussed different types of scopes. And there are three different scopes: global scope, function scope, and block scope. Now it's time to introduce let and discuss its behavior. And of course, talk about difference between let and var. Let was introduced in ECMAScript 6, and some people think that let is replacement of the var. But it is not exactly so. Okay, let's start our discussion, and let's start with the scope. Here I have the code that we got after the lecture about var, and we will start from here. So let's uncomment this section and talk about scope. And let's do following. Let's replace all occurrences of the var, here and here, with let. If you want to perform such kind of operation in Visual Studio Code, I mean perform replacement in multiple places, you need to press Alt or Option key and double-click all occurrences you want to replace, like this, and then type let. Okay, let's save this code and see what will happen in console. And result is the same as with var. So I get 10, that is a result of this console log statement. I get true, that is a result of this console log statement inside of the fn function. And I'll get uncode reference error, b is not defined, that is a result of this console log statement. It means that let, in this example, behaves exactly the same as var. Okay, let's expand this example, and let's comment this console log statement in order to get rid of this error. And below, I'll add block of statements. So just block, and here I'll declare variable b1, and it will be equal to 1, for example. And let's save the code and try to access b1 here. b1. Uncode reference error, b1 is not defined. So, if you use block of statements and declare variable using let inside of the block, this variable will be limited to this block. That's why here I get reference error. Of course, I can add console log statement here, b1, save the file, and I'll get reference error here that is a result of this console log statement. That is the difference between var and let. If I'll replace let with var here and save the file, so no error. Okay, let's go back to let, and let's remove this console log statement. Let's do following. Let's create for loop. So for let j equal 0, j less than 5, j++. And here comes block of statements. And let's, for example, console log j. Let's save it, and the result is here. But if I will try to access j outside of this for loop, for example here, I'll get uncode reference error, because j is limited to the block of statements here. If I replace let with var again and try to access j here, I'll get its last value. Okay, let's go back to let here. So, that is the difference between let and var. Let is limited to the block scope. And of course, if you use let inside of the function, behavior is the same as with var. Let is also limited to the scope of the function. Okay, let's move on. Let's comment this part out. And let's proceed to reassignment. Let's uncomment this block, save the file, and we will get nothing in the console because there is no console log statements here. And let's replace var with let here. So let c equal 1 and then c equal 2 and so on. Let's save the file, and here let's try to access c. Result is the same as with var. It means that you can easily reassign value of the variable defined with let keyword. And you see that we define variable here, reassign its value here, and then reassign value again inside of the function. So behavior is the same. Okay, let's comment this and move to redeclaration. That is an interesting part. Let's replace var here, option with double click, and replace with let. Let's save the file, and now I get uncaught syntax error. Identifier D has already been declared. It means that you cannot redeclare variable if you use let keyword. But you cannot redeclare it in the same scope. What does it mean? If I will comment this line out and save the file, I will get no error. It means that you can declare same variable in different scopes using let. D is variable that is defined in global scope and function scope. That's why we get no error here. And if I will try to console log D here and here, what I will get? I'll get false and 5. Because here I log this D that is defined in global scope, and here I log D that is defined in the function scope. Same will happen if I will declare D inside of the block scope. So simply let D equal to ABC and console log D. Let's save it, and here I'll get ABC. And finally, if I will add one more console log statement here, outside of any functions and blocks, what I will get? Let's save the file, I'll get false. I'll get this value that was assigned in the global scope. Okay, that is the difference between let and var. If you will try to redeclare a variable inside of the same scope, either global scope or function scope, let's try to do here, for example, let D, you'll get syntax error. Identifier has already been declared. Okay, let's delete this and let's save it. Let's comment this part out and let's move on to last part, hoisting. Let's uncomment this, replace var with let, save the file, and here we are. Again error, uncaught reference error, E is not defined. What does it mean? With let, hoisting doesn't work. If you will try to access variable before its declaration, you'll get error. Variable is not defined. That's why you always need to declare variables before their first usage, like this. Let's save it, and now error is gone, and I can successfully access variable E. In my opinion, it's very good that such feature was introduced in ES6, because it is a very good practice to define variables at the top of each scope. Let's do following. Let's add function fn4, and here in the body of the function, let's try to perform same thing. Let's use variable console log f, and only after that declare f. And let's assign value to it, f equal to 10. Let's save the file, and of course, before saving, let's add function call here. And now you'll get reference error, f is not defined. So same behavior. So here is separate scope, function scope, and in this scope we must define variable at the top of the scope before variable usage, like this. And if I'll save file now, I'll get no error. Of course, I get undefined here because I log f before assignment of the value. So let's swap those lines like this, and now I'll get 10. Okay, that is the behavior of the let in regards to hoisting. Let's comment this part and let's summarize. There are common and different features in let and var. And first important difference is that let is limited to global scope, function scope, and block scope, but var is limited only to global scope and function scope. Next important difference is redeclaration. If variable was declared using let, you're not able to redeclare it again using let in the same scope. You'll get an error in this case. With var, you will not get any error, and you are able to redeclare variable inside of the same scope. And last important difference is that variables declared with let are not hoisted. It means that you must define variables at the beginning of the scope, before variable usage. And that is a pretty good practice. Okay, let's move on, and next let's talk about const. See you just in a couple of seconds. Bye. We have already talked about var and let, and we have discussed differences between them. And now it's time to talk about const. Const was also introduced in ECMAScript 6. And before talking about its features, let's answer a simple question. What is const? Many people will answer following. Const is constant, and constant is value that doesn't change. So, examples of the constants are pi or e in mathematics. But this answer is completely wrong. What is the correct answer? Correct answer is following. Const is a variable that can't be reassigned. What does it mean? If you create any variable using const, you are not able to reassign its value. Example is following. Const my const equal to 10. And let's try to reassign its value. My const equal 20. Let's save the file, and here in the console you'll get type error assignment to constant variable. It means that after assignment to constant, you're not able to reassign its value. Let's try to do following. Let's try to remove this assignment and just declare constant like this, and then assign value to it. Let's save it, and now I'll get syntax error missing initializer in const declaration. It means that you are not able to declare constant without assignment of the value. You must assign a value to the constant together with declaration, like we did before. But again, you're not able to reassign its value. Okay, let's delete this part, and let's try to do following. Let's assign not number, but array. So simply array without any elements. Let's save this, and if I'll try to access my const here, I'll get empty array. But let's do following. Let's push additional element to my const array. Push new element. Let's save it, and now my const I get array with new element. Let's add one more element here. Another element. Let's save, and now my const has two elements. Let's create another constant. Const another const equal to empty object. And let's add key value pair to this object. So another const dot a equal 10. And now let's try to access another const. And now I'll get object with one property a and its value 10. I don't get empty object. But if I will try to reassign value of another constant, let's say I want to assign value with b equal to 20. Let's save it, and now I'll get error assignment to constant variable. It means that in case of array and object, I can mutate this constant, but I cannot reassign value to it. Let's comment this out. Same with array. I am not able to reassign its value, like this. Again, type error, assignment to constant variable. Let's comment this out. This happens because arrays and objects are reference types in JavaScript. My const and another const contain only pointers that point to the values, and value in this case is array and in this case is object, and we can change value, but pointer is not changed. With primitive data types such as strings, numbers, booleans, null, undefined or symbol, this doesn't happen because those primitive types contain directly value, not pointer. Let's create one more const. Const primitive type const, and it will be simply null. And now if I will try to reassign value to this primitive type const, like for example undefined, I'll get an error, assignment to constant variable. So again, here is an example of reference type, and I am able to change value of reference types. Here is also example of reference type, and here is example of primitive type. Okay, you may notice that I have used camel case here. So I have started with lowercase and then I used uppercase for next words. So that is called camel case. I have not used syntax like this, another const. This syntax with all uppercase letters you should use when you declare, let's say, true constant like pi. Let's do it here below. Const pi equal to math.pi. Math is a built-in JavaScript object and pi is its property. Let's now comment this line and save the file. And now if I'll access pi here, I'll get pi value, and that is a true constant. So in this case, you should use all capital letters. In those cases, it is better to use camel case. Okay, let's comment this part, and let's discuss scope, redeclaration, reassignment, and hoisting of the const, same as we have done with var and let. Let's talk about scope first. Here is part dedicated to scope. Let's uncomment it, and let's replace all occurrences of let with const. So here it is, here, here, and here. Let's replace with const, and let's save the file. And now I'll get uncaught type error, assignment to constant variable at the line 40. And here is this line. Of course, I cannot use const here in the loop, because in this case j changes its value, and it is not possible to do it with const. I'll replace const with let. And save the file. Now I don't get any errors. So, if you declare const in the global scope, this variable will be created in the global scope. And you can access it anywhere, either in global scope or inside of any function. For example, you can access a in the function fn. Like this. Let's save it, and here is result of this console log statement. You can define const inside of the function, and in this case, this const will be limited to the scope of the function. And you can define const in the block. In this case, const will be limited to the block, so same behavior as with let. If I'll try to access b1 here in the global scope, I'll get reference error, because b1 was defined in the block. Let's summarize. Regarding scope, const behaves same as let. It is limited to the global scope, or function scope, or block scope. Okay, let's move on to reassignment. We have actually discussed this before. If I change let to const here, I'll immediately get an error, assignment to constant variable. It's not possible to reassign value of the constant. I'll comment it out and comment out this part. and add here comment, not possible with const. And copy this here. Okay, let's comment this part and move to redeclaration. And you may guess that it is not possible to redeclare constant, same as it was with let. Okay, let's replace let with const here and here. Uncomment this line, save it, and now I'll get error identifier D has already been declared. You are not able to redeclare constants, same as let. But again, if you declare constants in different scopes, like this, and let's replace let with const here, you will be able to do that. Because again, those scopes are different. Here is global scope, here is function scope, and here is block scope. Okay, same behavior as with let. And let's finally move to hoisting. Let's replace let here and here with const. Save it, and now I'll get syntax error, missing initializer in const declaration. That's because I have not assigned value to the e here. You must assign value to the constant along with declaration. So here and here. Let's save it, and now error is gone. But let's try to swap those lines. This line and console log f. Let's save the file, and now you'll get reference error f is not defined at function 4. That's because we have declared and assigned value to the constant f after its first usage here. That's why those lines must be swapped back. So hoisting doesn't work with constants, same as with let. As we have discussed, with var it's possible to use variable before its declaration, but with const and let it's not possible. And you must declare variable before its usage. This concept is very important, and we will get back to it just in a couple of lessons, and we will discuss variable declarations using var, let and const, and hoisting. But now let's move on, and next let's talk about following. When you should use var, let and const. Let's save this, comment this out, and see you in the next lecture. Bye. Okay, we have discussed var, let and const and talked about behavior of each of them. But before answering the question which variable you should use in each case, I mean where to use var, let or const, let's talk about variables usage guidelines. And here I have prepared a list of very important guidelines that will help you to make your code better and, more important, make other developers to quickly understand it and change if needed. And first general guideline, you should make your code readable for other developers. What does it mean? Let's look at an example. First, let's write a small piece of code that is difficult to read and understand. Let's do following. A equal Mike. B equal London. Let's create function test, and it will take two parameters, x and y. And this function will return d, and d will be equal to string hello plus x plus from plus y. Space here. And let's add here var a, b, and d. And let's call this function. Let's call this function here. Test a, b. And let's console log result of this call. Hello, Mike from London. What is wrong with this code? First, we use variable names that don't reflect their contents, so just a and b. Then we declare function, and its name also doesn't reflect its contents. Then here we declare variables that are used above. And more interesting, we declare variable d globally, but variable d is used only inside of the function. And of course, inside of the function, in the parameters list, we also use meaningless variable names, x and y. Let's rewrite this piece of code and make it more readable. I'll copy this part and comment this block and paste copied code here. Okay, let's rewrite it. First of all, let's give all variables meaningful names. This variable will be named person name, and this will be person city. Same here in the parameters of the function. Same here, and person name instead of x. And here I'll call a function with person name and person city. Let's also rename test function and let's call it greet function. And replace test with greet here. And let's rename d variable. Greet person. Like this. And let's now adjust declarations of all variables. For simplicity, in this example, I'll use var everywhere. So just var here, I'll remove this block, and of course, I'll declare greet person directly inside of the function, because this variable should be limited to the scope of this function. We don't use greet person anywhere in our code outside of the function. Okay, now our code looks much better and everyone who will read it will immediately understand what happens here. I use camel case here, person name, person city, greet person, two variables person name and person city are declared in the global scope, third variable greet person is declared inside of the function, and finally we call greet function with two arguments, person name and person city. Let's save it, and of course I'll get same result here. But now our code is more structured and is more easy to understand and read. Okay, I'll add comment here, good code, and add comment here, bad code. Okay, let's comment this part and let's move on to the next guideline. Next guideline is always declare variables before first usage. In previous lectures, we have discussed that it is possible to use var before its declaration, and actually I have used this here in this bad code example. I have declared variables here and used them above. But with let and const, if you will try to do something like this, you'll get an error. And we also discussed that. Okay, let's add some code here in order to keep it here for reference. If you will do following, a equal 10, var a, it is fully functional code. And if I'll save it and try to access a, I'll get 10. Of course, with let or const, you'll get an error here. A is not defined. Okay, let's get back to var. And let's comment this part. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to next guideline. Always add use strict at the beginning of each JavaScript file. What does it mean? Let's look at the example. Here, I'll add use strict and do following, b equal 10. Let's save it, and in the console I'll get reference error b is not defined. If I'll comment out use strict and save the file, I'll get no error and I will be able to access b. Let's look at another example. Function fn without parameters, and here I'll do following, d equal b and return d. And here I'll call function like this. Let's save this, and now in the global scope I will be able to access variable d, and it is equal to 10. But I probably thought that variable d should be limited to the scope of this function, but it is not the case here. I don't use any variable declaration here. That's why this variable d is created in the global scope automatically. And if I add use strict option, of course I'll get error here. If I will fix it here using var, I'll get next error, d is not defined at function fn. I must declare variable d here inside of the function, like this. And of course, if I'll try to access variable d here, I'll get reference error d is not defined, because now variable d is limited to the function scope. As you have just seen, with use strict option, it's not possible to use variables without their declaration. And if you forget to declare a variable like this, you'll immediately get an error. But with var, you don't get any error. It means that use strict option makes your code more secure. And if you will forget to declare a variable, you will immediately get notified about that. Okay, in fact, use strict is a directive, and it was introduced in ES5, and older browsers simply ignore it. It is simply literal expression that must be placed at the top of the scope. You can do following. You can remove use strict here and place it here, at the top of the function scope. And in this case, if you will forget to declare b, you will not get any errors. But if you will forget to declare d, like this, you will get a reference error here. In this case, use strict impacts only function scope. Okay, let's get back to global scope, like this. Let's save it and let's move to last guideline. Last guideline is following. Don't expose to the outer scopes locally used variables. What does it mean? It means that all variables must be as hidden as possible. Example. Let's add function fn2, and inside of this function I'll do following. Here I'll assign value to my array equal to 1, 2, 3, and then I'll loop through this array for I equals 0, I less than my array dot length, I plus plus, and simply console log my array I. And before this function, I'll declare my array and declare I. And let's call fn2 function here. Let's save it, and here I'll get 1, 2, 3. That is the result of this for loop. And of course, here in the global scope, I have access to my array variable, and I have access to I variable. That is a completely nonsense here, because I is temporal variable that should be used just here inside of the for loop, and of course inside of this function. It shouldn't be exposed to the outer world. And that's why you need to declare variable I here. Again, I'll use var for simplicity here. And delete declaration here. Or let's do following. I'll remove this part. Copy this piece of code here and adjust it here. Var I here. And of course, declare my array inside of the function. And add comment. Don't expose. Expose. Let's comment this part, save the code, and of course result will be the same, but now I don't have access to my array or I. Okay, let's comment this out and let's summarize. You should follow those guidelines if you want to write readable and easy to understand code. Again, make code readable, that is a general guideline. Always declare variables before first usage, independent of var, let or const. Always do that. Always add ustrict at the top of each JavaScript file, and in this case, you will not be allowed to use any variables without their declaration. Of course, it is just one of the features of ustrict, and we will not discuss here all other options. This one is most important. And last guideline, don't expose internal variables to the outer scopes. Keeping all those guidelines in mind, let's move on to next lecture, and let's talk about usage of let, const and var. See you in a couple of seconds. Bye. Now it's finally time to answer the question: which variable declaration type you should use, var, let or const? Let's look at this diagram. After ES6 release and introduction of let and const, all developers are divided into two groups. Developers in the first group say that let is a new var, and developers in second group say that let is just var extension. Let's first talk about this group. Those developers say that you should use const whenever possible. If variable will not be reassigned and its value will not be changed across entire function or in the global scope, you should use const. In all other cases, you should use let, and var should never be used. That is the point of view of developers that say that let is a new var. Again, const everywhere and in some cases let. But I want to focus on this point of view. Let is var extension. What does it mean? Developers in this group think that you should use var, let and const depending on the signal that you want to give to other developers. If certain variable will be used multiple times across entire function, or if it is declared in the global scope several times in the global scope, then you should use var, and this declaration should happen at the beginning of the scope. If variable is temporal, like in a for loop or in the if-else statement, it means that this variable will be limited just to one block. Then you should use let and declare this variable directly in the block, or just before the block. And that is a signal to other developers that this variable is temporal and it will be gone. It will not be used in other places, and it is safe to reuse this variable if you need. And const should be used in cases where variable that you declare will not be reassigned. And of course, place of the declaration depends on usage. If you use, for example, const in the block, in the if-else statement, then you declare const directly in the block. If this const will be used several times across entire function, then you should declare it at the beginning of the function scope. That is an approach that developers in this group use. But developers in this group may say that, oh, if you use const everywhere, it is less prone to errors and you will not be able to reassign or redeclare such variables, and you don't use var because of those problems with hoisting and so on. But if you clearly understand what is hoisting and what is the difference in behavior of var, let and const, I'll recommend you to stick to this approach. Of course, you can use let instead of var in those cases, and declare variables that are used multiple times at the beginning of the scope. If you will use let instead of var here, it will be weaker signal to other developers than using var. Okay, let's look at an examples of appropriate usage of const, let and var. Let's first talk about const. where it is appropriate to use it. In the first example, I'll declare function multiplier. And this function will take one parameter and multiply it by a certain value. And this value, let's say, will be called mult. Notice capital case here. I'll suppose that this value will not be changed, and, for example, I want it to be 10. And I'll return a multiplied by mult. Let's call multiplier with argument 3 and with argument 5, for example. And let's console log results of those operations. Let's save, and here in the browser I'll get 30 and 50. In this case, I clearly say others that I will use constant variable across entire function called multiplier. And this constant will have constant value that will not be changed. Okay, let's move to next example. Let's comment this. And next example. Example 2, execute in Node.js. And now I'll tell you why you need to execute this code in Node.js. I'll use following command. Const path equal to require path. What is this? It is a common JS syntax that is used in Node.js to import external modules or modules that are bundled with Node.js. Browsers don't support this syntax. And this is an excellent example of const usage. And notice that I don't use all capital letters here. I use normal camel case. And here intent of the const is protection from reassignment. If I import path module and assign it to the path variable, I don't want anybody anywhere to change this assignment. I don't want path variable to have other value than this one. That's why const should be used here. And usually such imports occur at the beginning of a JavaScript file. Okay, let's use this constant here. Console log path.resolve and empty parentheses. This is one of the methods of the path. And let's save this code. Of course, I'll get immediately error in the browser, require is not defined, but I'll execute this code in Node.js. I'll go to the folder with these files and just node index.js. And here you see result of the console log statement. And here is the path to the directory where index.js file is located. Okay, let's move on to next example. Example 3. And in this example, I'll do following. I use constant in order to assign function expression to the variable. Const sum, and on the right side of this assignment, I'll use function expression. Just function with two arguments, a and b, and this function will return sum of a and b, a plus b. Here I have used anonymous function expression, and I have assigned it to the variable called sum. I am not planning to reassign some variable later on in the code. That's why I use const in this assignment. And you may see such examples very often. If I'll try to reassign sum, for example sum equal to 5, I'll immediately get type error assignment to constant variable. But of course, I can call this function. Let's log result of this call. Sum 2 and 5. Let's save this, and here I'll get 7. Okay, let's comment this part. And let's move on to let usage. As we have discussed, it is better to use let only for temporal variables in the block scopes. Example 1. For loop for let I equal 0, I less than 5, I plus plus. And here console log I. It is an excellent example of the let usage. Let is limited just to this block. Let's save this, and here you'll get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And of course, if I'll access I here, I'll get reference error, I is not defined. Another example. I'll create a function here, function short str. This function will take one parameter, str, that is a string, and here I'll do following. I'll use if-else statement. If length of the string is greater than 10, I'll console log just first 10 characters in str and add 3 dots. I'll introduce new variable, let new str, and then new str equal to str.substring 0, 10 and plus 3 dots, and just console log new str. And if string length is less than 10, else just console log str. And let's call this function here short str, and here I'll pass long string example. Let's save this, and here I'll get shortened version. If I call function with short string, simply short, I will get full version. Okay, you may notice that we have used 10 here multiple times, and that is a good place to introduce constant. And we can introduce it here, const max length equal to 10, and here replace 10 with max length. And let's change, for example, 10 to 15 and save. And here you will see adjusted output. This is a perfect example of let usage inside of the block. As you see, we don't need this new str in other blocks. We don't need it here, or we don't need it here in the function scope. That's why we declare it here in this block. And if I'll try to access it here in the else block, console log new str, of course I'll get reference error. Not defined. And we have introduced const at the beginning of the function scope, because this const is used here in the condition. That's why we cannot introduce it, for example, here. If someone will read this code and notice let here inside of the if block, it will be immediately clear that this variable is temporal and it will be gone after this block. And if you will need, you will be able to use this new str somewhere in other places. Okay, let's comment this example and let's move to the var usage. And let's look at following example. I'll create an object using var. Var person equal to object with 2 key value pairs, name, Bob, and age 25. And then I'll create a function update person. This function will take person as an argument, and then inside of the function I'll declare new variable using var updated person equal to empty object. And now I'll do following. If person.name, I'll add name field to updated person object. Updated person.name equal to person.name. And then I'll add new field to updated person object. Updated person dot updated add, that is a new field, equal to new date. And let's return updated person. At the top of the function scope, I declare variable updated person. And using var, I signal others that this variable will be changed several times across entire function. And if I'll call function here, update person, and call it with person, and let's console log here, I'll get following result. I'll get an object with two fields, name and updated at. Here it is. Here I have also used var in order to declare person object. And using var, I tell others that this person may be changed somewhere in the code. If I don't intend to change it, I can use const instead. So that is a signal that updated person will be changed several times across this update person function, and that is a signal that person object will be changed somewhere in the code. Of course, you can use let here and here instead of var, but in this case you lose ability to signal others where is the difference between temporal variable and variable that is used several times across entire function, or across entire global scope, like person here. Again, you choose yourself which kind of variable declaration you should use. And I suggest you to use different variable declaration types depending on your goal and context. Okay, let's move on, and next you'll get a challenge where you will need to rewrite piece of code using all knowledge about var, let and const. See you in a bit. Now it's time for you to practice with let, var and const. Make sure that you will check out this branch and you will get this code as a start point. Here it is. You need to rewrite code using let, var and const using all guidelines that we have discussed before. First one is general guideline, so you may start from guideline number 2. You may notice that some of the variables are declared, some are not, some are declared after their usage, there is a if statement, there is for loop, and so on. Let's execute this code and see what will happen. As input, we have two arrays, numbers 1 and numbers 2. And here below, we call only odd numbers function. And we pass numbers 1 and numbers 2 array. As a result of this console log statement, let's simply comment second one for a moment, I'll get two messages. There are 3 even numbers. That is the first message. And this message is generated by this if-else statement. And this if-else statement is placed inside of the only odd numbers function. Actually, it is function expression that is assigned to the variable. And as a result of console log statement here, I get this object. And this object is returned by the function. Here it is. It contains two key value pairs, odd numbers and even numbers quantity. Odd numbers is array that contains only odd numbers that are included in the source array. And even numbers quantity contains number of the even numbers in the source array. Let's comment this line and uncomment this call with numbers 2 array. In this case, I get message array contains only odd numbers. That is a result of this if-else statement. Here is this message. And I also get object with two key value pairs, even numbers quantity 0 and odd numbers is array 11, 21, 31. It is equal to input array because this numbers 2 array contains only odd numbers. Okay, I'll uncomment this line. What you need to do? You need to use var, let and const appropriately in all places. You may rename some variables if naming convention is bad, and of course result of this code must be the same as now. Make sure that you follow all those guidelines. I wish you good luck. See you. Okay, what is your result? Have you rewritten this code or not? Let's do it now together. But first, let's analyze variables that are included in this code. I'll clear console here, and let's analyze variables. There are two global scoped variables, numbers1 and numbers2. And you may notice that they are not defined at all. But if I'll try to access them, numbers1, I'll see that those variables are located in the global scope. It means that JavaScript has created them automatically. Let's look at the variables inside of the only odd numbers function. Notice that we use here function expression and assign it to variable only odd numbers. Inside of this function, there are several variables: odd numbers, even numbers quantity, len, I, and info. And you see that some of them are defined, some not. For example, odd numbers variable is defined here. Even numbers quantity is defined even outside of the function. And I'll be able to access it here in the console. Here it is. Of course, that is a wrong approach. And all variables that are needed only inside of the function must be defined here inside of the function. Okay, let's look at guidelines and let's start from use strict option. Let's simply add it at the beginning of the file. Let's add it here. And let's save the file. And of course, you will immediately get errors. Numbers1 is not defined. Let's define numbers1 and numbers2. And we need to always declare variables before first usage. And the best way to define numbers1, numbers2 is here, at the top of the global scope. What we need to use, const, let, or var here. Those arrays are used only here, in those function calls. We don't mutate those arrays. We don't reassign those variables. That's why the best way here is to use const. Of course, as we have discussed before, you need to keep in mind that if you declare using const arrays and objects, you may mutate values of those variables, like this. And you will not get any error on this line. But now we get error at line number 10. Let's move to it. Here inside of the function there is odd numbers variable, even numbers quantity, len, I, and info. And here we get error, len is not defined. Len is used here in the for loop, and it is array length. In fact, it is constant inside of the function. Let's declare it as a constant. Const, and let's use all capital letters. Len, and replace len with capital letters len here. And let's save the file. Now I'll get next error, I is not defined. Here it is. In fact, if I will remove use strict here and save, let's clear console, I will be able to access I in the global scope. That's because we don't define I here inside of the function. And JavaScript, in this case, will automatically create new variable in the global scope. And that is what we see here. Okay, let's get back to use strict. Of course, in this case, in the for loop, I is temporal, and it is not used anywhere else. That's why we should define it directly here using let, like this. Let's save the file and look at next error. But we don't get next error. Okay, let's look at the code again. We define odd numbers here using var, and we do it at the end of the function. And because of hoisting, we are able to use it here. Let's look at this guideline, always declare variables before first usage. And let's remove this declaration and declare odd numbers here. What do we need to use here, var, let or const? I suggest to use var here, because odd numbers will be used several times in the function. It is used here and it is used in the return statement. And you see, we initialize this variable with empty array, and then we push elements to this odd numbers array. That's why we shouldn't use const here. And because odd numbers is used several times in the function, we shouldn't use let here, because let is used for temporal variables. Okay, let's leave it here with var and move on to next variable, even numbers quantity. And you see that it is defined here outside of the function. Of course, we need to remove this declaration and then define even numbers quantity here directly in the function. What happens with this variable? Actually, we change it here in this loop. If number is even, then we increase this quantity. That's why we shouldn't use all capital letters here, because it is not a constant, it is variable. That's why better to declare it using var, and name will be in camel case even numbers quantity. And let's change all occurrences of even numbers quantity here. Here I use option and double click, here, here and here. And let's paste new name. Again, I also use var here, because this variable is changed inside of the function. Of course, it will be limited to the scope of the function, as any variable declaration inside of the function. And it is used in several places, that's why I use var. Okay, next one. Next is info here. This info is declared here before if-else statement. And you may notice that info is used only inside of this if-else statement. It is used here and here. And of course, in this case, I can and should use let. Let here and let here, and remove this declaration. If I will declare info here outside of the if-else statement, like this info will be available everywhere in this function. But I don't want to do this. I want to use it only inside of those blocks. That's why I declare info inside of each block, like this. Now it is much better, but one more thing left, this one. We have discussed that if you use function expressions and assign them to variables, it is recommended to use const, because you are not going to reassign value of such variables. Okay, let's go through all guidelines again. Always declare variables before first usage. We have declared numbers 1, numbers 2 here, odd numbers is declared here, even numbers quantity is declared here, len is here, I is declared directly in the for loop, let info tells us that info is declared inside of the if-else statement, here and here, and that's it. So we follow this guideline. Next, we use strict. We added use strict, let's save the file, and we don't get any errors. Next one, don't expose to the outer scope locally used variables. Let's go through our code. Here inside of the function, we use several variables. Let's try to access them outside. Here in the global scope. Odd numbers. Reference error, odd numbers is not defined. Next one. Even numbers quantity. Also not defined. Next, len. Not defined. I. Of course, not defined. It will be also not defined inside of the function, outside of this for loop. Next one, info. Also not defined. And it will be also not defined outside of this if-else statement blocks. And it seems that now our code follows all those guidelines. And finally, we have made our code more readable for us developers. and we use direct signals that tell others what happens inside of the function and outside of it. We change only those variables, odd numbers and even numbers quantity. We don't change len and numbers 1, numbers 2, and we use I and info as temporal variables. Okay, I hope you liked this challenge, and next you'll get one more challenge. See you in a bit. Bye. Here is the next challenge for you. Please check out this branch, and here you'll find task for this challenge. Let's look first at index.html file. In this file, I import external library. It is bootstrap.css, and I don't import any JavaScript files except index.js. So only CSS file is imported here. And here I have added some navigation items. Here they are on the right side: main, contacts, register and login. And you see that main tab has active class. And now main is active. Now if I click on menu items, on contacts, register, login, nothing happens. You need to write JavaScript code that will add interactivity to these menu items. If I'll click on contacts, then contacts should become active. You need to find all elements by selector.nav-link. Here is the selector. And then you need to use for loop to iterate through all elements. And inside of the for loop, you need to add onClick event handler. And inside of this onClick event handler, you need to remove first active class from all elements, and then add active class to the clicked element. If I click contacts, then you need to add active class to the contacts here. And you need to log to the console title of the menu item that was clicked. Please do all of this in plain vanilla JS. Don't use any external libraries, just plain vanilla JavaScript code. You should use document.querySelectorAll or document getElements by class name. Please note that in the for loop, you'll need to declare variable, and you should use, of course, let for this. Please try to use var instead, and examine difference between let and var in this case. At the end of this challenge, you should get following results. I'll check out finish branch. And now if I click on menu items, I'll get console log messages here, and you'll see that active class is changed for clicked menu item. If I'll choose selector here, you'll see that now this main menu item has active class. If I click contacts, then active is removed from this class list and added to this class list. Okay, if you're not familiar with vanilla JavaScript, you can simply check out finish branch and try to understand what happens, and try to replace let with var and compare results. Okay, good luck. Okay, how was it? Have you successfully performed this challenge or not? If not, let's do it together now. Let's declare first constant. Const menu items equal to document query selector all. And I'll select all elements that have class nav-link. Let's go to index.html, and here is an example of those menu items, and all of them have class nav-link. Let's simply console log menu items. Let's save this, and here in the console I'll get 4 menu items, and they are presented in the array. That's why I can use for loop in order to iterate through this array. Alternative approach is to use getElements by class name instead of query selector all. I'll demonstrate it now. Let's copy this row and instead of query selector all, use get elements by class name. And here, instead of .navLink, simply navLink. Let's comment this first line, save the file, and now I'll get array with same elements. Here it is. Okay, I'll go on with query selector all, and I'll delete this part. Okay, let's move on, and next I'll create for loop. For, and inside of the loop, I'll declare variable I, let I equal 0, I less than menu items dot length, I plus plus. And here inside of the block of statements in the for loop, I'll assign onClick event handler to each menu item. I'll do it in the following way. Menu items, square brackets I, it is a reference to specific element in the menu items array, dot onClick, equal to, and on the right side of this assignment, I'll use function. It is function expression. Function, without any parameters, and inside of the function, I'll do following. Let's simply add active class to the clicked menu item. Like this. Menu items, I, class list, add, and here I'll add active class. Like this. And let's add console log statement, console log, menu items, I, dot inner HTML. Let's save this and see what will happen. Let's try to click on contacts. And now I get contacts. And you see that active class was added to the contacts menu item. But active class remains on the main menu item. If I click login, active class is added to this menu item. But active class remains here and here. In the console, I get successfully messages that indicate which menu item was clicked. For example, register, again contacts, login, and so on. Okay, half job was done. Let's move on. Now we need to remove active class from all menu items before adding active class to the clicked menu item. That's why we need to do this here above. Let's add one more loop for let j equal 0, j less than menu items dot length, j plus plus. And here I do following. Menu items, square brackets j, class list, dot remove. I am removing active class and pass active here. Like this. Let's save this and see what will happen. Let's click contacts. And now you see that active class is gone from main menu item. Now let's click register. Same behavior. Active was removed from contacts menu item. Login, contacts, register, and so on. So now I have achieved desired behavior. What we can optimize in this code? We can add one more constant, because we use menu items.length in two places, here and here. That's why I'll remove it here and add one more constant, const len, equal to menu items.length. I'll add len here and replace this part with len as well. As you see, I use const for menu items declaration and for len declaration. I use const here because I don't suppose that menu items will be reassigned. I do it only once in this place. And len is capital case because it is treated as a constant, and this constant is not changed here in the code. Let me remove this console log menu items because I don't need it anymore, and let's save the code. And again, behavior is as expected. Okay, what will happen if I'll simply replace let with var here? Probably you think that behavior will be same as now. Let's try it. Let's save the code, and now let's click on contacts. And here I get type error, cannot read property class list of undefined. And here is a line 24 that produces this error, this one. What happens here? Let's debug. Let's simply add console log statement and print I here. Let's save this. Let's click contacts and you see that I is 4. If I click register, again I is 4. It is not 2 or 1 for contacts. It is always 4. Login, again 4, and so on. If I go back to let here and save and click contacts, I'll get 1 here. If I click register, I get 2, login 3, main 0. What does it mean? It means that with let we will get brand new variable for each iteration of the for loop. And in this case, we create a closure. We create a function that will be executed later on. Here is this function. And I will be placed in the memory separately for each iteration, for each function. It is called closure. With var, we will use single variable for all on-click event handlers. And it will be last value of this for loop. And it will be 4. That is the difference between var and let. Again, with let, brand new variable is created for each iteration in the loop. With var, variable remains the same. And that's why you cannot use var here. In fact, you can use var I here, but you will need to reassign I to another variable here inside of the for loop. For example, we can declare const current equal to I and use current everywhere instead of I. Like this. Let's save this and let's try to click on menu items now. And now it works as expected. But again, that's because we use temporal variable here instead of I. Okay, let's get back to let. In this challenge, you have seen very important difference between let and var. We haven't discussed this difference before. But now you know that if you use let variable declaration in the for loop, you will create brand new variable for each iteration of the for loop. And you are able to use those variables in the closures, like here. And those variables will be closed inside of those functions for later execution. And that is called closure. Okay, I'll remove this console log statement. And let me make one more improvement. I noticed that I have used menu items I several times in the code. That's why it is better to introduce new variable here. In fact, it will be constant, const menu item. If it is plural here in menu items, it is a good convention to use singular menu item equal to menu items I. Let's copy this and replace menu items here. Press Option or Alt key and select this and this. And paste menu item. Let's save this and result will be the same, but code will become more readable here. Let's add here a new line. Let's save this and here is the final code for this challenge. Before moving on, just quick important side note. In this challenge I have used traditional for loop. We have declared variable here, it is iterator, and we have added I++, same here. But of course, this challenge can be more easily solved using array helper methods, such as for each, or for in or for off loops. Please no worries, we will talk about all of those array helper methods and for off and for in loops later on in the course. This syntax was used here on purpose in order to show you difference between let and var. Okay, now this challenge is solved and see you in the next lecture. Bye bye. Okay, we have actually finished with a discussion about var, let and const. You have completed a couple of challenges, But now I want to dive deeper in more advanced topics, and I want to talk about JavaScript engine phases and about variables lifecycle. I want to do that in order to make you better understand what happens under the hood when you declare, for example, variable using var, or when you use const, let, or simply when you declare a function. Before talking about variables lifecycle, let's talk about JavaScript engine phases. Before your code is executed, it is compiled. JavaScript engine performs compilation of your code. On this phase, JavaScript engine looks through entire code that you supply to the engine, and it finds all variable declarations that are present in your code. It looks through all scopes: global scope, function scope, and block scopes, and it creates special activation object with all variables. And then engine starts execution of your code. And on this phase, your code is executed line by line. But during execution, all variables are already declared in the internal memory of the JavaScript engine. And JavaScript knows about scopes for each variable. Of course, this is a simplified process, and JavaScript engine performs more tasks than I have just described. But I want to make you just understand concept. And this concept is following. JavaScript engine runs code in two phases. First compilation and next execution. Let's move on, and next let's talk about variable lifecycle process. It consists of three phases. Let's talk about them next. See you in a couple of seconds. Bye. Let's now talk about variable lifecycle phases. You already used variable declaration, and you have used variable assignment. For example, var a is variable declaration, and a is equal to 10 is variable assignment. But that is a declaration and assignment in the JavaScript code. In the JavaScript engine, there are three different phases for each variable, and they are called declaration, initialization, and assignment. And this declaration is not this declaration. This declaration and this declaration are different. This declaration is used just to declare a variable inside of the JavaScript file, nothing else. And this declaration is performed inside of the JavaScript engine. And on this phase, variable is registered in the corresponding scope. For example, if you declare variable a here in the global scope, then JavaScript engine will declare this variable in the global scope. After declaration comes variable initialization. And on this phase, JavaScript engine allocates memory for each variable, and if variable is declared here in the JavaScript code using var, then it will get automatic value undefined. Let's prove this. Let's simply declare variable a here, save the file, and if I'll try to access a here, I'll get undefined. That is what happens with variable a. It is declared and initialized using JavaScript engine. And third phase is assignment. On this phase, certain value is assigned to already initialized variable. And if you perform assignment in the JavaScript code, like this a equal to 10, then same assignment is performed on this phase in the JavaScript engine. And now if I will try to retrieve value of the a, I'll get 10. It means that in this case, variable was already declared, initialized, and assigned in the JavaScript engine. Let me show another example. Let's create a function, and this function will take one parameter a. And let's simply log inside of this function a. like this. And let's call this function fn without any parameters, and let's save the file. And here you'll get undefined. It means that on this step, variable a is already declared and initialized using JavaScript engine. But we have not used even var or let or const keywords. It is just parameter inside of the function. But JavaScript engine is clever enough and it has performed initialization of this variable a. If I will delete this parameter here and save the file, I'll get uncode reference error a is not defined. That's because a was not declared and of course not initialized using JavaScript engine. And if I'll get back to a and save the file, I'll get undefined here. It means that in this case, variable a was declared inside of the function scope and it was initialized with undefined value. That's why I am able to access it here and I'll get value undefined. If I'll try to access this variable a outside of the function, of course I'll get reference error a is not defined. Okay, let's delete this and summarize. There are three different phases in variable lifecycle process, and they are called declaration phase, initialization phase, and assignment phase. And those phases are completed inside of the JavaScript engine. On the declaration phase, variable is registered in the corresponding scope, for example in global scope or function scope or block scope. Then variable is initialized. It means that specific part in the memory is allocated to this variable, and after that variable is assigned. On this phase, specific value is assigned to the initialized variable. After declaration phase, variable is considered as declared. After initialization phase, variable is called initialized, and after assignment phase, variable is called assigned. Please keep in mind all those three phases because we will talk about them later on. And next, let's talk about declaration, initialization, and assignment of variables declared using var keyword. And we will also discuss when those lifecycle phases occur. I mean, either on compilation stage or execution stage in JavaScript engine. It may look complicated, but no worries, it is pretty simple. And next, let's talk about variable declaration using var. See you in a bit. Bye. Now let's focus on the lifecycle of different variable types. We will talk about lifecycle for var, undeclared variable, let, const, and function. And first will be var. I have splitted here declaration, initialization, and assignment into two JavaScript engine phases, compilation and execution. Declaration and initialization of the var occur on the compilation phase. And those variable lifecycle phases are bundled together. It means that after declaration, when JavaScript engine registers variable in the scope, immediately starts initialization, and variable is initialized with undefined value. But that is only related to var. With let and const it will be different. And then, when code is executed line by line, and when JavaScript engine hits such line as assignment of the value to the variable, third variable lifecycle phase occurs, and it is assignment. And after this phase, variable will become assigned and will have value, in this case 10. Let's look at this in action. Let's declare variable var a, and before its declaration, I'll assign value to it, a equal 20. What happens here? When JavaScript engine performs compilation phase, it scans this code and finds all variable declarations, and it finds this line. And when this line is found, those two phases, declaration and initialization, are performed on JavaScript engine, and variable gets value undefined. That's why if I'll try to do following, for example, I'll comment this line for a moment and console log A. Save the file, and here I'll get undefined. That's because on execution stage, variable A is already declared and initialized here, and it has value undefined. That's why I am able to access this variable here above its declaration in the code. But if I do following, uncomment this line and save, when JavaScript engine executes code and hits this line, it will perform assignment of the value to the variable. And after this, variable is assigned and has certain value. And in this case, value is 20, and on this line I am able to access this value, because variable is already assigned. Let me split this example into two examples without assignment. And here I'll get undefined. And next example with assignment a equal 20, and I'll get 20 here. And let me rename those variables to b. Okay, another example with function. Let's declare function fn. No worries, we will talk about function declarations later on. Now we are focused just on var. And here inside of the function, I'll declare variable c. Let's perform same. Try to access variable c here before its declaration here. Let me comment those examples and just call function here. Let's save, and now I'll get same result, undefined for variable c. But at this moment, when JavaScript engine scans entire code, it finds that variable c is declared inside of the function scope, and variable c will be declared and initialized inside of the function scope. But again, value will be undefined. And when JavaScript engine during execution phase hits this line, it already has c in memory in this scope, and that's why I get undefined here. But if I will try to access variable c outside of the function scope here, of course I'll get a reference error, c is not defined. Because variable c is bound to the function scope, and it happened on the compilation phase in JavaScript engine. And here I get undefined. And of course, if I'll add another variable, for example variable d, and let me assign value to it first, d equal 10, and then console log d, and then declare this d. Let's save this. Oh, let me comment this line. And now I'll get undefined and 10. In this case, variable d was declared and initialized with undefined value on the compilation phase. And on the execution phase, when JavaScript engine saw this line, it has assigned value to the variable d. That's why on this line I'm able to access value of the variable d. And of course, d will be undefined here, outside of the function scope. d is not defined. Here it is. Please note that behavior will not change if I'll move this declaration of the c here at the top of the function. Let's save this, and there is no difference. Because in fact, JavaScript engine does declaration in this way. Actually, var d is also put here above. That's how JavaScript engine executes code. It already has declarations of variable c and d, independent of the place of their declaration here in the code. I'll leave it like this here in this example. Of course, before we have discussed that you must define variable before usage, but again, we are talking here about variable lifecycle, and this example is very important for understanding of this two-phase process. Okay, let me comment this out. And let's move on to next topic. And next we will discuss following. What will happen if you will not declare variable here in the function scope at all? How this variable will be initialized and declared using JavaScript engine? Let's talk about this next. See you in a bit. Bye. In this lecture, let's talk about undeclared variable. Undeclared variable may appear in your code if you don't use useStrict option. If you use useStrict, of course, you will get an error if any variable is not defined. But let's examine the case when useStrict is absent. And what happens if you assign value to the variable somewhere inside of your code, either in the global scope or in a function scope or in the block scope, doesn't matter. In this case, you see that nothing will happen on the compilation phase. When JavaScript engine will read your code, it will not do anything with this variable a. No declaration, no initialization, nothing. And only when code is executed and JavaScript engine hits this line, this variable will be immediately declared, initialized, and assigned. All three phases together. And what is more interesting, variable will be declared in the global scope. And of course, it will get value that you assign to it, in this case 10. But why is it declared in the global scope? Let's look at an example. Let's create a function fn, and here inside of the function, I'll simply use another function fn2, and in this inner function, I'll assign value to variable a. Here inside of the fn function, I'll call fn2 function, like this. And then outside of the fn function, in the global scope, I'll call fn function. And let's add console log a here, before a, console log a. And let's see what will happen. Let's save the file, and I'll get reference error a is not defined. At the moment of compilation, when JavaScript engine looks throughout the code and tries to find all variable declarations, it doesn't find declaration for variable a. That's why variable a is not declared and of course is not initialized. This code is executed in following way. First comes this function call, then engine starts execution of this function, hits this line, call to function 2, and executes function 2, line by line. And when engine hits this line, it sees that there is no a variable declared or initialized in its internal memory. That's why we immediately get reference error a is not defined. Let me add comment here, a is not defined. And if I will comment out this line and add console log a here, like this, and save the file, I'll get 10. Because now engine hits this line and it immediately declares, initializes, and assigns value to the variable a. And after this, I am able to access variable a. And what is more interesting, I am able to access variable a here, outside of the fn2 function, and here, in the global scope. Let's save the file, and I'll get 3 values of a. It means that when engine hits this line, it looks for variable declaration here inside of the scope of fn2 function. It doesn't find it, and then it looks in outer scope, that is a fn function for function 2. It also doesn't find declaration of variable a here, I mean declaration in the memory. and then it looks in the global scope. And again, no variable a found in global scope. And only after that, this variable a is automatically declared, initialized, and assigned in the global scope. That's why I'm able to access it here. And this variable a is present in the window object as a property. Here it is. That's what happens when you don't use useStrict option and not declare variable properly. In this case, any variables that are not declared will be automatically declared, initialized, and assigned in the global scope. Such variables are exposed to all functions in your code. They will become available everywhere. And that's violate one of the guidelines that we have discussed before. You must hide variables as much as possible. And in this case, if you declare variable a with var and save the file, of course you will get a reference error, a is not defined, for example here and of course here. Now variable a is declared and initialized on the compilation phase, and on the execution phase, value 10 is assigned to it. Okay, I'll remove this declaration. And let me add here a comment. A is declared in the global scope. Let's save this, and let's move on to next topic, and next we will talk about let and its behavior on those phases. See you in a second. Bye. Now let's talk about let lifecycle phases. And in this lecture, you'll finally understand why you are not able to use variable declared with let before its actual declaration in the code. Here things become more interesting, because here declaration phase is performed on compilation phase in JavaScript engine, but initialization and assignment are performed on the execution phase. What does it mean? During compilation phase, when engine finds declaration of variable a using let, it finds, for example, this line let a, it declares variable in corresponding scope. But variable becomes declared but uninitialized. It means that if you will try to access variable declared with let before this line, you'll get an error, a is not defined. And this period between start of the code and till this line of code is called temporal dead zone. And it tells you that you are not able to access variable until you hit this line where this variable is declared. That's why you are not able to use variable before its actual declaration in the code. And when JavaScript engine hits this line, let a, in the execution phase, it initializes variable, and variable gets value undefined. And later on, if you assign value to this variable will become assigned and will have assigned value 10 in this example. That's the process for let. Let's look at this in action. Let's first declare variable a using let a. And let's try to access variable a before its declaration in the code. Console log a. Save the file, and of course you'll get reference error, a is not defined. What happens here is this. JavaScript engine scans this code on the compilation phase, finds this declaration, and declares a variable and assigns it to the global scope in this case. It means that before execution phase, JavaScript engine already knows about this variable. Actually, this happens inside of the JavaScript engine. But in your code, order is opposite. And that's why if you will try to access variable a before its actual declaration, you will hit temporal dead zone, where you are not able to access variable that is not yet initialized. And only when a variable is initialized, if I'll move console log here, I will be able to access A. Because on execution phase, when JavaScript engine found this declaration, let A, it has initialized variable and value will become undefined. And of course, after initialization, I'm able to access this variable. And then probably I'll assign value to variable A and console log A again. And of course, on this line, variable is already assigned. Okay, I'll add a comment here, A is not defined. On this line, variable is initialized, A is initialized with undefined. Here I'll get undefined. Here variable is assigned, A is assigned, and has value 10. And of course here I'll get 10. That is a process with let. And this process does not change depending on the scope. If you will move all those lines into the function, let's add function here, function fn, and let's suppose that this will happen inside of the function, and then I'll call this function fn. Nothing will change in fact. Let's save this, and nothing changed here. But now variable A is declared inside of the function scope here. And of course, if you will try to access variable A here outside of the function scope, you'll get reference error, A is not defined. Let's add comment here, not defined. And let's copy those lines, comment this part. Here is a function example, and above will be example in the global scope. Okay, let's save this. One more important difference between let and var that we haven't discussed before. If I'll try to access A here, I'll get 10, because variable is already declared, initialized, and assigned. But if I will try to access window.a, remember that window is a global object and I'm trying to access its property A, I'll get undefined. But if I will declare A with var and save the file, if I will try to access window A again, I'll get 10. That is the difference between var and let. If you declare variable with let, then this variable is not added as a property to the global window object. That's why I get undefined. And if I access simply window, I will not find A here on the list. Okay, that is the process with let. And now you understand what happens when you try to access variable declared with let before its actual declaration in the code. And in fact, you simply hit this temporal dead zone where variable is declared but is not yet initialized. Let's quickly try one more thing. I'll comment this part, and here I'll add 2 lines. A equal 10 and let A. If I'll save code now, I'll get reference error A is not defined. But if I comment out this let A and save the file, I get nothing. And if I will try to access A, I'll get 10. With let A, as you see, I am not able to perform assignment because in this case, variable A is declared in the global scope, but not yet initialized. And if I try to perform assignment to this variable, of course I get error, A is not defined. But if I comment out this line and save the file, what happens in this case? Do you have an answer? In fact, we have discussed it in previous lecture. And if you don't declare variable, it is declared automatically in the global scope. And it is declared using var. And now, if I'll try to access window A, I'll get 10, because A is now one of the properties of the global object window. here it is. Okay, let me delete this, uncomment this part, save the file, and let's move on, and next we will talk about lifecycle of the const. See you in the next lecture. Bye. In this lecture we will talk about lifecycle of the const. We have already discussed lifecycle of the var, let, and undeclared variables. And now it's time to talk about const. But before talking about const, let me shortly recap what is temporal dead zone. Temporal dead zone is special interval between start of the code execution here and till declaration of the variable using let or const. And if you will try to access variable in this temporal dead zone, you'll get a reference error, variable is not defined. What does it mean access? It can be assignment of the value to the variable or simply console log this variable. That is also accessing variable. And this happens because variable is already declared on the compilation phase, but is not yet initialized on the execution phase. And this zone is present when you define variables using const. Diagram is pretty similar to let, here it is, but as you see with let, initialization and assignment phases may be separated, but with const, initialization and assignment are bundled together. Why? Answer is pretty simple, we have discussed it before. You are not able to just declare a variable using const like this, without assignment of the value. You must always assign value to the variable that is declared using const, like this. And that's why initialization and assignment are performed just in one shift. Okay, let's summarize what happens with const. If you use const somewhere in your code, then on compilation phase, when JavaScript engine scans your code, it finds those declarations in corresponding scopes and declares those variables. It registers them in corresponding scope. And at this point, variable is declared but not yet initialized. And on the execution phase, when code is executed, and when JavaScript engine sees this line, it performs initialization and assignment. And variable becomes initialized and assigned. And it has value, in this example, 10. Before this line, variable is located in temporal dead zone. And if you will try to access it, of course you'll get an error, a is not defined. Same behavior as with let. Okay, let's try this in action. Let's add const a equal 10. And if I'll try to access it here, console log a, of course I will get 10, because at this point variable is declared, initialized and assigned. But if I will try to move this console log statement here above, and let me comment this line, I'll get a reference error, a is not defined. On the compilation phase, all declarations of variable using const are found, and a is registered in the global scope, but it is not yet initialized. And when code is executed, this console log statement is located in the temporal dead zone for this variable a. And that's why when I'm trying to access variable a here, I get reference error, a is not defined. Not defined. Let's comment this line, and here, of course, I'll get 10, because variable is defined, initialized and assigned. Of course, if I'll try to do something like this, remove assignment, I'll get syntax error, missing initializer in const declaration, because you are not allowed to initialize variable declared with const without its assignment. Those phases are bundled together. Okay, let's get back to assignment here and save the file. Of course, if you will try to declare const in the block, let's add a block, const b equal 1, console log b, you'll get 10 and 1. But if you will try to access b here, console log b, you will not be able to do that, because b is limited to this block. As we have discussed before, in the previous lectures. And in this case, what happens? On the compilation phase, two variables are declared. Variable A is declared in the global scope, and variable B is declared in corresponding block scope in this one. When JavaScript engine performs execution of the code and hits this line, A is initialized and assigned in the global scope. When this line is hit, then B is initialized and assigned in this block scope. And that's why if you try to access B here, you get reference error, B is not defined. That is the process with const. It is much simpler than with let because assignment and initialization are bundled together. But again, it also has temporal dead zone, that's why you must define const and assign value to it before its actual usage. Okay, let's move on, and next let's talk about function lifecycle. It's an interesting part. See you in a bit, bye. Now it's time for interesting part. Function lifecycle. Probably you thought that function in JavaScript is something different than simple variable, but in fact it is simple variable, and it is declared, initialized and assigned same as any other variables. Here is example of the function declaration. Function, then comes name, then in parentheses list of parameters, and in curly braces statements inside of the body of the function. And when JavaScript engine finds such function declaration somewhere in the code, it immediately performs all three steps in variable lifecycle. It declares this function, it registers it in corresponding scope, then it initializes it and assigns value to it. And value of the function is actually list of statements that is located here in the body of the function. It is pretty simple. That's why you are able to define function anywhere in the scope and access it anywhere above, because variable is ready to use on the execution phase. Let's now look at this in action. Let's declare function smile, without any parameters, and in the body of the function I'll console log smile. And here, down below, let's call this function. If I'll save it, I'll get smile here in the console. What happens here? On compilation phase, JavaScript engine finds this function declaration. Function declaration consists of keyword function, smile, that is the name of the function, and contents of the function. And this function is immediately declared, initialized, and assigned in the global scope. That's why I am able to access it anywhere. I can access it here above. And now I get two smiles. I am able to access it here because function smile is already declared, initialized, and assigned before execution phase. Let's now do following. Let's add console log statement here, console log, and log simply smile. I don't add parentheses here because I don't want to call this function. I simply want to log contents of this variable because smile is usual variable. Let's save this. And here in the console I get result in the string format, and here you see contents of the function. And again, I am able to access this variable here because of this. Because function is declared, initialized, and assigned before code execution. Let me quickly add some comments here. Function contents in the string format. Then here I call function. Function is initialized, declared, and assigned. Declared, initialized, and assigned. And here I simply declare function in the code. In fact, inside of the JavaScript engine, this happens. This function declaration is moved at the top of the global scope. But in our code, this function declaration sits here. Okay, and here, of course, we successfully invoke function. And let me add comment here above, function declaration, because this is function declaration. Let's comment this example and let's move to next one. In the next example, I'll use function expression. What is function expression? Function without any name and simply console log. That's function expression. Like this. This is called function expression. And if I simply save this, I'll immediately get error unexpected token here. That's because I am not able to use simply function expression in this way. I can add parentheses here, for example, and then save this. And now error is gone. In such a way, we have turned this function expression into the statement. You see semicolon here. But in fact, this piece of code doesn't do any job here. JavaScript engine simply goes through it and doesn't perform any actions. Because this function doesn't have any name, that's why it is not declared anywhere, and it is not invoked, that's why we don't see this console log message in the console. But I can call this function directly here. If I'll save file now, I'll get this console log message. And that is called immediately invoked function expression. I'll add a comment here. If immediately invoked function expression. And actually, nothing from those phases happens here. Function is simply executed and gone. I don't want to dive deeper into ifs here, but I wanted to just explain the concept of the function expressions. Let's comment this line and let's do following. If you want to use function expression, you can assign it to variable. But let's now make short pause and go on with this in the next lecture. See you in a second. Bye. Okay, let's go on and let's create function expression and assign it to the variable. Like this. Const sum equal to function that takes two parameters a and b, and then return a plus b. And now this function expression on the right side, in fact it is anonymous function expression because it doesn't have any name. Now it is assigned to the const sum. Let me add here comment, function expression assigned to the variable. And now it is statement, and I need to add semicolon here. If I'll save it, I don't see any errors here, because now it is valid statement, valid assignment. Let's now call this function here down below. Sum 5 and 10, and in order to see something in the console, I'll add console log here. Save the file, and now I get 15 here. What happens now? In fact, now JavaScript engine does this job. It finds const declaration here. Sum is the name of the variable. It declares this variable in the global scope in this case, but it not yet initializes it. And only on the execution phase here, when JavaScript engine finds this assignment, this one, this variable sum is initialized and assigned. And that's why after this assignment I am able to call this function here. If I'll try to do same here above, let's save this, I'll get reference error, sum is not defined. Because now I am calling sum in temporal dead zone. That's why you are not able to call functions declared in such way. It is not actually a function, it is a function expression assigned to the variable. You're not able to call it because of this. Because you declare this function using const, and const has temporal dead zone. Let's try to change const to var here and save this. Now I get another error. Sum is not a function. Why this happens? Let's get back to the diagram with var. Here it is. In this case, on the compilation phase, variable sum is declared and initialized and has value undefined. That's why when I am trying to access sum here, it tells me that sum is not a function, because sum is undefined here. Console log sum. It is undefined. That is the behavior if you use var here. If you use let instead of var or const, of course you will get same error as with const. Sum is not defined. Let's get back to const, because normally const is used if you want to assign function expression to the variable. That is the difference between function expressions here and function declaration here. With function declaration, you are able to access function because of this. Because function is declared, initialized and assigned on the compilation phase. And with function expression here, it is not the case. Because now it is simply variable that is declared using const. And on this line, sum is located in the temporal dead zone, TDZ here. And only here, after sum was initialized and assigned, you are able to call it. That is the behavior of function expressions. I hope now you understand this difference and you are able to use function expressions and function declarations appropriately. Let's summarize. If you use function declaration, then JavaScript engine will perform declaration, initialization and assignment of this variable. I am calling this variable because function is a variable all together. And this happens before execution phase. That's why you are able to access functions that are declared in such way before actual declaration in the code. But if you use function expression assigned to the variable, like in this example, you're not able to call such functions before this assignment. You must first assign function expression to the variable and only then call it. That is an important difference. Remember that before we have discussed following guideline. You should define variables before their usage. And if you will follow this guideline, you should place this piece of code here above. But this guideline is for variables declared using var, let and const. With functions, it may be helpful in some cases, especially when developing external modules, and we will talk about this later on. Now you should understand what happens under the hood when you declare functions like this or declare variables using var, let and const. And finally, let's say what is hoisting. And let's do this next. Answer will be pretty simple and lecture will be very short. See you in a bit, bye. After all those lectures about variable lifecycle, question: what is hoisting? Answer is pretty simple. Hoisting is a term that describes process of compilation and execution phases. Nothing else. And different variables behave differently in terms of hoisting, because of different behavior on compilation and execution phases. For example, let and const are only declared on the compilation phase, and that's why you're not able to access them before actual declaration inside of the code, because of temporal dead zone. If you use var, then variable is declared and initialized on the compilation phase. That's why you say that variable is hoisted, and you are able to access it before actual declaration in the code. Pretty simple. Same with functions. Functions are also hoisted, because on the compilation phase, with function declarations, as we have just discussed in the previous lecture, JavaScript engine performs declaration, initialization and assignment all together. That's why on the execution phase, you are able to invoke any function that was declared somewhere below. And this is called function hoisting. Pretty simple. And now you fully understand this process. Okay, next let's look at the example that combines declaration of variables using const, let, and var, and function declaration. And let's discuss what will happen on the compilation phase and on the execution phase. And then you will get a challenge for you. See you in a bit, bye. In this example, we will put together everything that we have discussed in this section. And here you will see declaration of the constants, here. You will see different types of scopes. Here is a global scope, here is a block scope, here is another block scope. You also see declarations using let here. You'll see function declaration here. This function is called mult. Here is declaration using var. And here above you see anonymous function expression that is assigned to the variable that is declared using const. What happens in this example? There are two variables, a and b, that have values 2 and 5 correspondingly. And there are two functions, sum, here it is, and mult, here it is. And there is condition. If b is greater than a, then we will execute those two statements. Otherwise, we will execute those two statements. As you see, we assign different values to the variable called final result, here it is. If b is greater than a, then we will assign result of the mult function. We multiply a and b. Otherwise, we assign result of the sum function. We sum values of the a and b. And finally, at the end of the code, we print final result to the console. What needs to be done? On the right side, you see two files, compilation.js and execution.js. And those files are created here in the root of our project. Those files are simply large blocks of comments. And here we will add everything that will happen on the compilation phase in JavaScript engine and on the execution phase in JavaScript engine. For example, when compilation stage will start, it will find declaration of this variable a and declare it in the global scope. Here, var a. And a becomes declared and initialized with value undefined. And let me add here line 16, because that is a result of the line 16, like this. And so on. Same with execution phase. On this phase, JavaScript engine will execute this code line by line. And first step will be execution of this statement. And on this line, global scope variable a becomes assigned, and its value is 2 after this line, and so on. Now, before solving this, I want to give you a chance to do that yourself. Try to fill all those gaps in the compilation phase and outline all steps in the execution phase, and see what you will get at the end. Please don't execute this code. Try to interpret it yourself and find out what will be the result of this final console log statement. Please use all knowledge that we have discussed in this section. Get back to those lectures about variable lifecycle phases, look at those diagrams for different variables lifecycles, for var, undeclared variable, let, const, and functions. All those lifecycles appear here in this example. If you want to try to complete this yourself, please check out this branch. But anyway, in the next lecture we will go through it together. But please try it yourself. See you in a bit, bye! Let's now go through this piece of code from beginning till end and see what happens on the compilation phase and execution phase. And of course, first phase will be compilation phase. In order to make those comments more visible, let me change color theme of the Visual Studio Code. I'll change it to light plus, like this. Okay, here I have added example of the variable declaration on the compilation phase. But in fact, this declaration of variable a will not occur the first, because compiler will go through the code from the top. And first variable declaration that it will see will be this one, const b equal 5. That's why I'll add line 2 here. And on the line 2, compiler will declare const b. Const b. And variable will be declared, but not initialized, because it is const. That's why at this moment variable will be located in the temporal dead zone. Then comes const sum on the line 4. Let's add line 4 here. And on the line 4, there is function expression assigned to the sum variable. And here behavior is exactly like here. Const sum is declared, but not yet initialized. This assignment will not be performed here on the compilation phase. That's why const sum is declared, but is located in the temporal dead zone. Next comes if-else statement, but here are no variable declarations in the global scope. That's why let's go on. This variable a declaration is already here on the line 16. Variable a is declared and initialized with undefined value. Then comes function declaration. Here it is, on the line 18. Let's add it here. Line 18. And I'll write it like this. Function mult. And this function is declared, initialized, and assigned. This happens because all those variable phases are performed simultaneously on the compilation phase for function declarations. And here is function declaration. Okay. Now let's look at the function scopes and block scopes. Here is anonymous function expression that is assigned to the sum variable. But in fact, in this function scope, nothing happens on the compilation phase, because sum variable is declared, but is not yet initialized. That's why I'll add here comment, nothing happens. Okay, next comes this if-else statement. And here are two block scopes, this one. And inside of each block scope, there is one variable declaration using let. Here variable mult result is declared, and here variable sum result is declared. Let's add those declarations here, because compiler will see those variables and declare them on the compilation phase. Okay, line 9. On the line 9 we declare mult result, and variable is declared, but is located in the temporal dead zone, because it is not yet initialized. Same as with const here. In the else block, I'll copy this part and paste it here. On the line 12, let sum result. Same as with mult result, sum result is declared, but is not yet initialized. There are no other variable declarations here in the if-else statement, but you may notice variable called final result. But this variable is not declared either here in this block or here. It is also not declared in the global scope. You don't see any declarations for it. But compiler will not do anything with this on the compilation phase. And finally, we need to look at the mult function again. This mult function contains two parameters, a and b. And on the compilation phase, those two parameters will be declared as variables inside of the function scope. That's why I'll add var a here and var b. Let me add lines here, line 18, and here line 18 as well. And those variables a and b will be declared and initialized. Declared, initialized with undefined. Same as with var. I'll copy this part and paste here. Okay, now it seems that that's all for compilation phase. Let's summarize shortly. In the global scope, there is const b, const sum that are declared but not yet initialized, then var a that is declared and initialized with undefined, function mult that is declared, initialized and assigned because it is function declaration. Here it is. In the sum function, nothing happens because this assignment will be performed on the execution phase. Nothing happens on the compilation phase. Then in the if-else statement, there is declaration of mult result and sum result. And on the compilation phase, those variables are declared but not yet initialized, same as with const. And finally, in the mult function, there are two parameters a and b, and on the compilation phase, they will be declared and initialized with undefined. And this will happen in the function scope of the mult function. Okay, now we can move on to the execution phase, and on the execution phase, we will go through the code line by line and execute it, and see what will happen finally on this line 24. Let's make a short break and move on after the pause. See you. Okay, now compilation phase is completed, and let's move on to the execution phase and go through the code line by line. First line, a equal to. What happens here? JavaScript engine tries to find declaration of the variable a in the memory. And of course, it looks in the global scope, because this statement is located in the global scope. It looks through the global scope here and finds variable a that is declared and initialized with undefined. That's why it is safe to assign value to it. And that's why at this step, variable a becomes assigned and gets value of 2. Next line, line 2. What happens here? JavaScript engine sees that there is assignment to the const b. And first, it looks for declaration of the variable b in the memory. And again, it looks in the global scope here. And in the global scope, it finds variable b that was declared using const, and now it is safe to perform initialization and assignment of the value. That's why in the global scope, const b becomes initialized and assigned, and it gets value of the b is 5. Now it is declared, initialized and assigned. Okay, next line. Let me delete this line to here. Next line is line 4. On this line, you see assignment of the function expression to the variable called sum. And first of all, JavaScript engine looks for declaration of this variable sum. And it looks for it in the global scope here. And of course, here it is, const sum is declared. And that's why it is safe to initialize it and assign value to it. I'll copy this and paste here. Const sum becomes initialized and assigned. And its value is this function. I'll copy this. I'll copy this function and add double quotes here and paste function in the double quotes. What else happens on this line 4? You see here function with two parameters, a and b. And at this moment, those two parameters will be declared and initialized in this function scope. And of course, they will be initialized with undefined. Let me add here this function scope, like this, and copy from the mult function this part. And paste here. I'll add here sum scope, and line is 4. Var a declared initialized with undefined, and same for var b. Again, those variables a and b are different from the a and b here in the mult function, because here is mult function scope, And here is scope of the anonymous function that is assigned to the const sum. Okay, now we can move on to the next line, and next line will be this one, if-else statement. Line 8. What happens here? In this if-else statement, JavaScript engine first evaluates this condition, b greater than a. In order to evaluate this condition, JavaScript engine looks for those variables b and a, and it looks for them in the global scope, because if-else statement is placed in the global scope. It looks for b. b is a constant, and on the compilation phase it was declared, and here on the execution phase, on the line 2, it was initialized and assigned, and its value is 5. It means that it is safe to use this variable here, and its value is 5. Let's now look at the variable a. Variable a was declared and initialized on the line 16 on the compilation phase, and it was initialized with undefined. But on the execution phase, on the line 1, this variable became assigned, and its value is 2. It means that b and a are already assigned on this line, line 8, and it is safe to evaluate this condition. And this condition will be evaluated to true, because b is 5 and a is 2. 5 greater than 2. Let me add here on the line 8 comments about what is happening here. b is already assigned and has value 5. Same with variable a. a is assigned and has value 2. And condition b greater than a will be evaluated to true. I'll write it like this. And that's why this block of statements will be executed. Let's look into this block. I'll add this block here. In this block, first comes line 9. Line 9 here. And on this line, JavaScript engine sees assignment of the value to the multi-result variable. It looks for declaration of this multi-result variable. And it finds it here, because in this block scope, on the compilation phase, multi-result variable was declared. And now it is safe to initialize it and assign value. I'll copy this part from here in order to save time for typing. And here I'll change global scope to the block scope, because here is block scope, here it is. And now it is let variable, I'll write it like this, called multi-result. And this variable becomes initialized and assigned. And its value is this. This is function call. And that's why before assignment of the value to the multi-result, we should invoke this function, mult, and use two arguments a and b. JavaScript engine looks for values of a and b. And it finds those values like here. b has value 5 and a has value 2. That's why it is safe to call mult function with those two arguments, 2 and 5. Now JavaScript engine looks for the mult function. And first it looks in this block scope. And of course, no function declarations of the mult function are found in this block. That's why JavaScript engine will look in the outer scope. And outer scope for this block scope is global scope. And of course, in the global scope, here, this function mult was already declared, initialized and assigned. It means that it is safe to call this function here on the line 9. I'll add here this comment, safe to call mult function. And I'll add in the parentheses here, assigned in the global scope. And of course, a and b are assigned and have values. Values 2 and 5. And that's why mult function is called here with arguments 2 and 5, like this. Let me copy this part and paste it here, because it happens inside of the block here. And let's look at the mult function, because now on the line 9 it will be executed. Let's add here line 18, and here in the parentheses I'll add comment mult function execution. Okay, let's execute this function. Here it is. Before execution of those two statements one by one, JavaScript engine will look for variable declaration inside of the function scope. And first it will find this line, var result. I'll add this line 21 here, line 21. And on this line, variable result will be declared and initialized with undefined. Var result. I'll copy this declaration from here and paste here. Declared and initialized with undefined. And of course, variable result is declared inside of the mult function scope. Okay, what else happens here? You see those two parameters a and b. And here we call mult function with values 2 and 5. That's why before function execution, those variables become assigned. Let's go back to the compilation phase and scroll down to the mult function. And you see that variables a and b were declared and initialized with undefined. And at the moment of the function call, those variables will become assigned. I'll add this here above. I'll add function scope, colon, and in the function scope, a becomes assigned and will have value 2, becomes assigned, and b will get value 5 and also becomes assigned. Again, those variables a and b are function scope variables, because they are declared here as parameters a and b. Okay, let's separate those lines like this, and only now JavaScript engine starts execution of the mult function. And first line will be this one, line 19. And on this line you see this assignment. A multiplied by b is assigned to result. JavaScript engine looks for the values of variables a and b. And it finds its values here in the function scope, because those variables were already assigned. That's why we multiply 2 by 5, 2 multiplied by 5, and then JavaScript engine looks for result variable, this one. It finds this variable in this function scope, because here this variable was declared and initialized with undefined, and that's why we can assign its value. Result becomes assigned and gets value 10. That's it. Next comes this return statement, line 20. And on this line, we look for result variable and find it in this function scope, and of course, we return its value. 10 is returned. And here this mult function call ends. I'll add here comment. Mult function call ends here, like this. Okay, and after that, this result, that is a 10, can be assigned to the mult result variable. Let's get back to the line 9. In fact, if I will look at this line, first this mult function is called, and only then result is assigned to the mult result variable. That's why I will copy this line and paste it here after the function call, like this. Mult result becomes initialized and assigned, and mult result value is 10 here. Value is 10. Then comes line 10, this one, line 10. On this line, there is a statement where mult result is assigned to the final result. First, we look for mult result variable, and it is found here in this block scope, and its value is 10. Next, JavaScript engine looks for the final result variable. It looks for it in this block scope. Let's go back to the compilation phase. There is no final result variable in this block scope. That's why JavaScript engine looks in the global scope for this variable. There is also no final result variable in the global scope. That's why, at this moment, JavaScript engine will declare, initialize, and assign this final result variable, all in one shift. And this will be performed in the global scope. Global scope and final result is declared, initialized, and assigned. Var final result equal to 10. Like this. Declared, initialized, and assigned. And this happens in the global scope. And this is very important. It is a behavior of the JavaScript engine when it sees undeclared variable. And we discussed this before. After this line, this block ends. This else block is not evaluated, because it is not needed here, because this condition was evaluated to true. This line is ignored, because it was used on the compilation phase, here. It was used to declare and initialize variable a. This function declaration is also ignored on the execution phase, because we used it on the compilation phase here. Mult function was declared, initialized, and assigned. That's why, finally, we get to this line 24. And I'll add this line here, line 24. And on this line, we try to access final result variable. This console log statement is placed in the global scope. That's why JavaScript engine looks for this final result variable in the global scope. And it successfully finds it, because it was declared, initialized, and assigned here. It was undeclared variable in this block. I'll add comment here. Final result is found in the global scope, and its value is 10. That's why console log final result will print 10 to the console. 10 is printed. That's all. That is the process of the execution phase. And I really hope that now it is fully clear what happens on the compilation phase and on the execution phase. Please note that this example was relatively small, just 24 lines of code. But you see how many different operations are performed by JavaScript engine. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this example, and next you'll get a small challenge for you. I'll see you soon. Bye bye. Now it's challenge time. Please check out this branch, Variable Lifecycles start, and here you'll get task for you. Please look at the index.js file, and here you will find a list of commands. And your task is to find out what will be printed here on this console log line. Please fill in everything that will happen on compilation phase. You may notice that there are two scopes in this example. Global scope, where, for example, B is defined, and this block scope. It is outlined here. And you should also go through the code line by line and fill in all steps that will be performed on the execution phase. Again, final goal is to find out what will be printed here to the console. Please don't execute this code. You should find out what will be printed to the console by going through the compilation phase and execution phases, same as JavaScript engine will do. If you will be stuck and will not understand what is happening on one of the lines, please get back to the previous lectures and watch them again. And please don't guess result. You need to know for sure which values those variables will have at the end of this code. I wish you good luck, and in the next lecture we will go through this challenge together. See you there. Bye bye. I hope you have understood what will happen in this code and what will be printed finally in this console log statement. Let's now go through this code line by line and see what will happen on the compilation phase and on the execution phase. Let's start with compilation phase. Here are two scopes: global scope, where this variable is declared, this variable and this, and block scope. Here it doesn't have any name, it just scope between curly braces, this one. And here inside of the scope, variable C is declared. Okay, let's see what is happening in the global scope and in the block scope on the compilation phase. First line, line 1, it is declaration of the variable b using let. Let b. It means that b is declared but is located in the temporal dead zone because it is declared using let. Next comes declaration of the variable a. Here it is on the line 9. And here variable a is declared and initialized with undefined. Okay, next comes declaration of the variable c. It is line 11. Line 11 var c, same as with a, declared and initialized with undefined. Okay, and that's it for global scope. Now let's look at the block scope. Here at the line 6, variable c is declared using let. Let me add colon here. Let c, and variable is declared and is now in the temporal dead zone, same as b in the global scope. Okay, and that's all for compilation phase. Nothing difficult. Let's now move on to the execution phase. On the execution phase, on the first line, there is assignment of the value to the variable b. Line 1. First, JavaScript engine looks for this variable declaration in the global scope, and it finds it here. Variable is declared, and that's why it can now initialize it and assign value. Let b equal 5. Variable is initialized and assigned. Value is 5. Okay, next line. Next line is this one, a equal b. Line 3. It is assignment of the value of the variable b to the variable a. First, JavaScript engine looks for this variable, variable b, and it looks for it in the global scope. It finds it here, because variable b is already initialized and assigned, and its value is 5. That's why here on the right side of this assignment will be number 5. Now JavaScript engine looks for the variable a. It looks for it also in the global scope. Let's go back to the compilation phase. And here, in the global scope, variable a is declared and initialized with undefined. So here, before this line, variable a has value undefined. That's why it is safe to assign this variable. And on the line 3, variable a becomes assigned, and value is 5. Next comes this block scope. And here inside of this block scope there is just one statement where value of the a is assigned to the variable c. It is line 6. First, JavaScript engine looks for the variable a. It looks first in this block scope. But there is no variable a in this block scope. Only variable c is declared here. That's why JavaScript engine goes into the outer scope into the global scope and finds variable a in the global scope. It is declared, already initialized and assigned, and has value 5. That's why on this line 6, value of the variable a is 5. Next, it looks for variable c, and it looks in this scope. And of course, here there is declaration of the variable c in this block scope. That's why it is safe to initialize and assign value to this variable. Line 6, c equal 5. Let me add here let c equal 5. Variable is initialized. I'll copy it from here. Initialized and assigned, and value is 5. Next line. Next line is this one. It is line 9. And on the line 9, we assign value to the variable a. First, we look for variable a in the global scope. And we find this variable. Here it is. It is already assigned and has value 5. And because it is declared using var, it is possible to reassign its value. If it would be const, for example, then here on the line 9 error would be thrown. But it is declared with var, that's why it is possible to reassign its value. And on the line 9, a gets new value. Value is 1. It means that this variable is reassigned. And that's all. This line 11 is ignored on the execution phase because it is just declaration of the variable c, and we have already used this information here on the compilation phase. And finally, JavaScript engine looks at the line 13, where values of the variables a, b, and c are printed to the console. And now, using this information on the execution phase and this on the compilation phase, we can easily answer the question what will be printed here to the console. Of course, JavaScript engine looks for those variables in the global scope, because this console log statement is located in the global scope. And let's find those values of the variables a, b, and c. A. Here on the line 9, the last action that was performed with variable a is reassignment of its value. And a has value 1. Next, b. b was initialized and assigned here on the line 1 in the global scope, and it has value 5. b has value 5. And finally c. We look for value of the c in the global scope. Here on the line 6, variable c was initialized and assigned, and its value was 5. But let me add here initialized and assigned in the block scope. Like this. But here we are looking for variable c in the global scope. On the execution phase, nothing happened with variable c in the global scope. That's why JavaScript engine looks for information about variable c in the memory that was recorded there on the compilation phase. And here on the line 11, variable c was declared and initialized with undefined. That's because of this line. That's why variable c has value of undefined here in this console log statement. C is undefined. And that's all. I can add here comment 1, 5, undefined. Okay. If you want, we can try to execute this code. Let me save this file and start web server. Now I'll go to the browser and here open developer tools, and in the console I'll see those values 1, 5 and undefined. I hope you got same result when you have performed this challenge yourself. And if so, I can say that you have understood this topic pretty well. If you got another result or something is not fully clear, please get back to the previous lectures and watch them again. It seems that I have made typo here. It should be like this. Let's save the file. Okay, let's make a pause and see you in the next section. Bye bye. Finally, we have reached the end of this large section. And I have made this section so large on purpose. I wanted to cover all aspects of the variable declarations using var, let and const in order to make you understand first what is the difference between those variables and how those variables are handled by JavaScript engine. In this section, we have discussed where it is suitable to use let, where var and where const. And now you can choose variable declaration types more wisely, because now you know everything about const, let and var. In this section, we have also discussed different JavaScript engine phases, namely compilation phase and execution phase. Now you know that on the compilation phase, JavaScript engine scans entire code and finds all variable declarations inside of it, and creates separate scopes. And inside of each scope, JavaScript engine performs variables declaration, initialization, and assignment. And again, this process differs for different variable kinds in your code. And on the execution phase, code is executed line by line, keeping in mind everything that happened on the compilation phase. In this section, we have discussed in details different variable lifecycle phases, such as declaration, initialization, and assignment. And now you know how JavaScript engine behaves when it sees different variable declaration types. We have discussed var lifecycle, we talked about undeclared variable lifecycle, we discussed let lifecycle. You know what is temporal dead zone, that is a time when a variable is declared in the memory, but is not yet initialized. And each time when you try to access a variable that is in temporal dead zone, you'll get an error. Variable is not defined. We discussed const lifecycle. It is pretty similar to let lifecycle with just one exception. With const, initialization and assignment is performed just in one shift on the execution phase, because you are not able to declare const without assigning value to it. We have also talked about function lifecycle, and you know that if you declare a function using function declaration like this, then on the compilation phase, all three phases of the variable lifecycle occur simultaneously. It means that function is declared, initialized, and assigned all in one shift. And on the execution phase, you can use this function anywhere you want, independent of the place of the declaration of this function. Of course, this process is different when you assign function expression to the variable. And when you try to access variable before its actual declaration in the code, that is called hoisting. In this section, we have also discussed variables usage guidelines, and they are very important, and you should always keep them in mind when you declare variables in your code. Let me shortly recap those guidelines. In general, you should make code readable for other developers. That is your main goal. Usually, you write code not just for you, and many other developers probably will edit it and read. And you need to make sure that code will be easy to read and easy to edit. That's why you should use appropriate variable names, appropriate variable declaration types, and so on. You should always declare variables before their first usage. You should always add useStrict at the beginning of each JavaScript file. With this option, no undeclared variables will be allowed in your code. And please don't expose to the outer scopes locally used variables. Hide variables as much as possible. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this large section, and the next section will be dedicated to functions. And we will start with recap of what is traditional function is and where it is usually used. And then we will move on to the arrow functions, and you will understand difference between traditional JavaScript functions and arrow functions. Some people think that arrow function is replacement for traditional function, but that is completely wrong, and there are many use cases where you should and must use traditional function instead of arrow function. See you in the next section. Bye bye.